Good morning, and welcome to this week's in-depth special of The Global Current. I'm Alex Krause.
And I'm Dominique DiMarzio.
First in news, China strengthens its Great Firewall.
And then we take a special look into both Obama's recent trip to India and Greece's pivotal national elections.
And finally, we sit down with Professor Elizabeth Wilson to discuss American involvement in Guantanamo Bay.
Thanks for tuning in and enjoy the show.
And now, Vaughn Rogers reports on China's recent strengthening of their Great Firewall.
The BBC reported on Monday that 3 providers of virtual private networks, or VPNs, have reported their services blocked in Chinese cyberspace by China's Great Firewall. Astral, Strong VPN, and Golden Frog previously allowed Chinese netizens access to foreign sites such as Google, Facebook, and Twitter, all of which have been banned in China. Gizmodo defines VPNs as networks that create a direct encrypted link to either a private network or website using the local internet. Thus, the user's internet provider or IP address is changed to a different location, say Texas or Korea, making it difficult for anyone to track or to see the user's information, hence why China has made them illegal. China Digital Times quotes Qin An, a cybersecurity expert at the China Institute for Innovation and Development Strategy, commenting on the crackdown on VPNs. Authorities apparently cannot ignore VPNs as they affect our cyberspace sovereignty. For instance, a shortcut has to be blocked since it could be used for some ulterior purposes, although it might affect others who use it in a right way. Chinese state media has claimed that the blocks are also in place for safety reasons. The International Business Times reports that the Chinese state media announced all foreign technology, products, and services would be banned for use in the country until they are deemed safe and controllable by the government. Does the Chinese government have the right to claim internet space as a territory in the same way it would the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands or Taiwan? Can a government claim part of an arguably non-existent space? Lu Wei, director of China's State Internet Information Office, describes the Internet as a global village in which all information and experience is shared. Securing the Internet is every government's top priority, but Chinese censorship sequesters this shared experience and isolates the country further from the rest of the world. This is Vaughn Rogers reporting for The Global Current.
Our first double feature special story is on Greece's recent national elections. Reporting on the elections is Lucy Nuguna.
Change is never easy, and the people of Greece are cynical after a long period of hardship. This hardship comes in the form of the financial crisis Greece has been experiencing for the past several years. Greece, a country of about 11 million people, has suffered high rates of unemployment as a result of a downtrodden economy. Last week's elections provided an opportunity for change. The depressed economy gave a sense of desperation to the elections for a new leader. Alexis Tsipras now steps into the role of Prime Minister, creating optimism and hope in the Hellenic Republic.
Greece has turned a new page. Greece leaves behind the austerity of destruction, fear, and authoritarianism. It leaves behind 5 years of humiliation and suffering. And it proceeds with optimism, hope, and dignity, and makes steady steps in a changing Europe.
Alexis Tsipras carries the image of a man of the people, able to empathize with the common citizen. Prime Minister Tsipras won the election under the Syriza party as a neoliberal geared towards serious reform of the previous leadership's policy of austerity, a policy put into place as a condition of bailouts from the EU. A primary initiative of the new government is to raise funds to cover the country's massive debts. The issues of tax evasion and a low minimum wage are other initiatives that the Syriza party will have to deal with. Greece, a member of the Eurozone, has been labeled the sick man of Europe by some because of its severe economic downturn. After 5 years of financial struggle, the Greek population still lives with unfavorable living conditions due to poverty and unemployment. The election of a new and young prime minister has stoked hopes for economic growth and job creation. In a statement reported by the BBC, the new prime minister claimed that the people of Greece had a right to joy and celebration, which the past 5 years have lacked. While some celebrate the new prime minister, dissenters view him as a nightmare for the Eurozone. Investors and politicians are concerned that the new Prime Minister's initiatives will destabilize the euro, according to ABC. Some experts say that Prime Minister Tsipras's promises may be overly optimistic. In an interview with the New York Times, several analysts noted that Prime Minister Tsipras must be cognizant that Greece must still follow regulations put in place by the Eurozone, or risk even greater financial ruin. Reporting for Lucy Nguna, this is Bill Golba on the Global Current.
And now, analysis writer Blythe Brady further discusses the elections and their historic results.
Last Sunday, votes from the Greek parliamentary elections were tallied, resulting in mixed reactions across Europe. Why Syriza's victory in Greece has international implications rests on two pillars, the European Union and the European economy. Since the end of World War II, Europe has undertaken a push for unity among countries, tracing from a coal and steel community to the modern-day EU. However, throughout this process, there has been a fundamental strain. What happens when voters in a member state have different opinions? As the New York Times reports, this tension is rooted in the fact that the countries in the European Union are democracies and thus have to respond to the will of their citizens. The question of differing opinions by the citizens of separate member states remained under the surface as the Union deepened. The recent Greek elections bring the issue to light once more, as the citizens of Greece make a case for abandoning austerity, while the citizens of Germany, Finland, and the Netherlands, who are tired of spending tax money to prop up countries who get themselves into financial binds, stand by austerity measures. As the director of Open Europe, Mats Persson, states, quote, "Ultimately, this is a clash of democracies rather than a clash of ideas," end quote. Yet at the same time, the Greek elections do represent a clash of ideas of how best to bring a country out of debt. The leader of Syriza and the new Greek Prime Minister, Alexis Tsipras, campaigned to put an end to the austerity measures and, instead, vouched to increase public spending in order to reduce the country's debt. To this end, Tsipras announced in his first cabinet meeting on Wednesday that he will negotiate with creditors over the $270 billion bailout in order to find a more beneficial system for Greece to pay back its creditors, reports the BBC. Tsipras said, quote, "We won't get into mutually destructive clash, but we will not continue a policy of subjection," end quote. In response to these remarks, the Athens Stock Exchange fell by 8%. Displaying fears of businesses and international interests. Furthermore, as the new government plans to put on hold several major privatization projects, including the Public Power Corporation of Greece, business concerns continue to deepen. While the global stock markets largely absorbed the result of the Syriza victory in stride without much panic, the countries within the European Union seem prepared for battle, according to the New York Times. Germany, France, and the Netherlands have publicly stated that Greece must stand by its previous commitments, reports the BBC. Furthermore, Germany has taken the hard stand for Greece to fulfill its obligations to the so-called Troika of lenders, the Eurozone, the International Monetary Fund, and the European Central Bank. The German economy minister, Sigmar Gabriel, warned that, quote, "Our aim must be to keep Greece in the Eurozone, but solidarity and fairness works both ways," end quote. And, quote, "Citizens of other Euro states have a right to see that the deals linked to their acts of solidarity are upheld," unquote. These remarks, coupled with the stance of Prime Minister Tsipras, reflect fundamental dissimilar ideals and standards for the same issue of debt repayment. Both sides will have to work quickly to come to agreement as the current bailout program of loans for Greece is set to end on February 28th of this year. Greece could receive up to another 1.8 billion euros if conditions set by the Troika are met. At the same time, it is estimated that Greece will need to raise about 4.3 billion euros in the first quarter of 2015 alone in order to help pay its way, according to the BBC. The victory of Syriza, the coalition of far-left and right-wing parties around anti-austerity, and the prevailing attitudes in the other EU member states highlight the ongoing tensions within the European Union. As Greece appears poised to send shockwaves through Europe by ending austerity measures and refusing to pay back its lenders at the agreed-upon rate, European markets are likely to face tough times ahead. Greece, as a member of the Eurozone, has the ability to lower confidence in the euro. Coupled with the euro's already low inflation rate, the euro could sink further in the global exchange market, which would require further action by the European Central Bank to raise confidence. However, without Greece honoring its commitments to the ECB, it would be difficult to send a message of strength and unity to international investors. At the same time, Greek voters have spoken, and they have voted to put an end to the harsh austerity that they have lived under for the past 5 years. How a balance can be struck between these two opposing views has yet to be determined, although it would seem clear that both sides will have to yield more than they are willing to do so. Reporting for the Global Current, this is Blythe Brady.
For our second special feature, we bring you double coverage of President Obama's recent diplomatic trip to India. Reporting on the trip is Emily Livaday.
President Obama's arrival in India was greeted with dancing, parades, and festivities as he attended India's Republic Day parade in New Delhi as Prime Minister Narendra Modi's guest of honor. But the president's visit was not solely for leisure. He had an agenda to forward human rights and climate change. Over the course of the visit, the U.S. President and the Indian Prime Minister strengthened their friendship. President Obama is the first president to visit India twice. Although the two world leaders are friends, President Obama warned that he would not give Prime Minister Modi a free pass, according to the New York Times. On Tuesday, the president concluded his 3-day trip with a speech calling for India to put forth more effort in ending human trafficking and reducing greenhouse emissions. This visit coincides with the strengthening of U.S.-India military ties. NPR reports that President Obama approved a 10-year extension for the two nations to jointly develop military weapons. New legislation is being enacted that will allow American companies to build nuclear power plants in India, reports the New York Times. Prior to Obama's arrival, India officials made extensive efforts to clean up New Delhi's streets. The homeless were encouraged to spend 3 days in a shelter, and shop vendors were encouraged to go elsewhere. According to the New York Times, police regularly ask vendors to leave whenever big people come to visit. One girl said, "At first they do it with affection, and then if we don't come, they beat us up." Officials also made an effort to round up wild monkeys and cows. Due to traditional beliefs, great care was taken to avoid harming any of the animals during removal. This is Emily Livaday for the Global Current.
For more on the trip, we turn to Global Current analyst Karina Taylor.
On the surface, President Obama's weekend trip to India was a mission focused on economics. In reality, the president's visit will have greater ramifications meant to outlast his time in office. The first important aspect of this trip was its length. Obama's first visit to India in 2010 was 10 days long and discussed more for its cost than its politics. At the time, CNN reported a $200 million price tag being tossed around by a number of critics of the administration. This time around, Obama, once again accompanied by his wife Michelle, kept things short, even leaving a day earlier than planned. According to the BBC, the first couple skipped a visit to the Taj Mahal to make personal condolences to the grieving nation of Saudi Arabia after the death of King Abdullah, and to pay respects to their new ruler, King Salman. Official appearances and statements produced a sort of carrot-and-stick version of diplomacy as Obama made overtures of friendship to recently elected Prime Minister Narendra Modi, while still pressing for human rights reform. The importance of strengthening the relationship between Obama and Modi cannot be understated. Modi, who Indian media captured breaking protocol and greeting the visiting American president on the tarmac, has been banned from visiting the U.S. since 2002 over allegations that he failed to stop religious riots in the state he led, according to the New York Times coverage of the trip. The U.S. embracing a man whom NPR says neighboring Pakistan views as a hardline Hindu nationalist could be seen as an indication of a shift away from the difficult alliance the U.S. has historically maintained with India's rival. As if to counter such thoughts, the president made his views on religious extremism clear in his speech in Sirapur, Delhi.
We know from experience that nations are more successful when their women are successful. When girls go to school, this is one of the most direct measures of whether a nation is going to develop effectively is how it treats its women. When a girl goes to school, it doesn't just open up her young mind, it benefits all of us because maybe someday she'll start her own business or invent a new technology or cure a disease. And when women are able to work, families are healthier and communities are wealthier and entire countries are more prosperous. And when young women are educated, then their children are going to be well educated and have more opportunity. So if nations really want to succeed in today's global economy, they can't simply ignore the talents of half their people.
President Obama made similar connections between aspects of his visit and human rights after attending India's Republic Day as Prime Minister Modi's chief guest on Monday the 26th. Republic Day is an anniversary of the nation's adoption of its constitution and declaration of sovereignty, and as Reuters reports, it's long associated with the anti-Americanism of the Cold War, making Obama's invitation, the first for an American president, a major landmark in U.S.-Indian relations. Included in the festivities were military units, some now containing female soldiers. The president highlighted the importance of gender equality across professional fields at that same speech at Sierra Fort.
Our freedom of religion is written into our founding documents. It's part of America's very first amendment. Your Article 25 says that all people are equally entitled to freedom of conscience and the right freely to profess, practice, and propagate religion. In both our countries, in all countries, upholding this fundamental freedom is the responsibility of government, but it's also the responsibility of every person.
The United States delegation brought much more to New Delhi than a firm handshake and opinions on the rights of ordinary citizens, however. The main purpose of the trip was to announce the finalization of a civilian nuclear power deal brokered by Obama and Modi's predecessors back in 2006, according to the BBC. Previous obstacles to implementing the agreement included a lack of liability protection for American firms constructing the promised plants, but this week's announcement revealed a compromise between sides on that issue. An insurance fund will be formed in exchange for less oversight of nuclear materials. The BBC notes that these deals worry critics of nuclear power who fear an Indian version of Japan's 2011 Fukushima disaster. This seemingly sudden push to tie American fortunes to India's is multi-layered. Reuters reported last Monday that the White House hopes that India could serve as an ally against the Islamic State's growing influence. A major American investment in the nuclear sector of India's economy reaffirms the U.S.'s commitment to the region to other major powers, like China, which eye the subcontinent's large consumer market with increasing interest. In order to better form an alliance, the American president must be seen within India as a supporter of the nation's leadership, while maintaining his stance as a standard-bearer of American values of tolerance and equality, a tightrope walk that results in moments like the speech in Sierra Fort. Hope for future progress lies in both sides' ability to strike that balance. This is Karina Taylor reporting for the Global Current.
And finally, the Global Current talks to Seton Hall professor Elizabeth Wilson about Guantanamo Bay.
For this morning, I have Professor Wilson from the School of Diplomacy and International Relations. She is an assistant professor in human rights law. She joined the School of Diplomacy back in 2008 and is also a graduate of Harvard Law School. Prior to joining the School of Diplomacy, she also worked in private practice in Washington, D.C., and in cases regarding detainees from Guantanamo Bay. Professor Wilson, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Daniel.
Now, describe some of your successes when it came to working with the detainees in Guantanamo.
Well, I had been working at a corporate law firm in D.C. called Wilmer Hale for less than a year. And there was a call that went out over the intranet asking for if there were enough people interested in taking on a case involving a group of detainees in Guantanamo Bay. I was very interested in this and persistently volunteered and ultimately became part of the team that represented a group of Bosnian Algerians. They were not the typical detainees in Guantanamo. They had been apprehended outside of Afghanistan after being accused of trying to bomb the embassy in Bosnia. There was a group of, there was a law firm called the Center for Constitutional Rights that was kind of spearheading this litigation. And one of the things that was very interesting about the way it all worked was because the government lawyers were the ones actually, defending or trying to prosecute the detainees who were holding them, and kind of what I meant to say was defending Guantanamo from legal review. The cases all went to mostly corporate lawyers. So all of the lawyers who represented detainees were lawyers who normally were representing corporate America. And the case that I worked on there eventually became the lead case in the litigation and was the named case that went up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ultimately decided that the detainees in Guantanamo had at least the constitutional right to habeas corpus. And then we began to have judicial review of the detainee cases.
All right, you just mentioned the habeas corpus cases that you brought up to the courts on behalf of these detainees. What other types of cases did you bring up to the courts and other types of litigation you participated in?
Originally, the detainees in Guantanamo were entirely cut off from the outside world. There was no access to them at all. No one knew their names. Their families were not in contact with them. And so the original cases were kind of fighting for the right of lawyers to represent the detainees and to find out, to get the government to say what the legal basis was for their detention. The second set of cases that I was involved with were cases on behalf of released detainees, where we were trying to get some sort of compensation for the detainees for the treatment that they had endured in Guantanamo. I also represented a group of British detainees who were released very early on and had never really been considered serious terrorism suspects. And we tried to sue the U.S. government for damages for the torture that they had endured in Guantanamo, but ultimately successful.
Okay, and then other than the rights of habeas corpus and being held in Guantanamo without really any charges, what other rights were being infringed?
Well, there was a lot of what happened, or a lot of the concern of the lawyers for the detainees had to do with the treatment that they were being given in and a lot of the work of lawyers, not as much as something that I was involved with, but just in very slow and kind of grueling trench warfare, really to try to improve the conditions originally the detainees in Guantanamo were housed outside and in makeshift sort of mesh wire cages and exposed to the elements in Cuba. Ultimately, a more permanent prison was created, and this had some of the downsides of prisons in the United States. There was a lot of use of solitary confinement. Prisoners were ranked, and the what was called comfort items were used by way of punishment in terms of trying to get information out of them. So if you cooperated, you might get a blanket or a little bit of extra food, or especially having their religious items that were taken away if they were perceived to be uncooperative. This was a really big bone of contention. So there were a lot of rights that had to do with the treatment of detainees.
And one of the campaign promises back in 2008 for Barack Obama was the closure of Guantanamo Bay. Of course, after 2 terms, that hasn't happened, and it's uncertain if Guantanamo will close. And also with the recent scandal with the Gitmo commander being relieved of his duty due to this probe into a man's death, what do you think is the future of Guantanamo and its detainees?
Well, at this point, it'd be wrong of me to say that I'm absolutely sure that it will be closed, that it must be closed, although it seems to me that's the absolutely right thing to do. There's been tremendous pushback mostly from the Congress to President Obama's plan to close Guantanamo. I think that it is something that damages our reputation abroad. We have managed to bring down the population that is in Guantanamo by 3/4, if not more. And so, it's been being closed for individual detainees on a regular basis since President Obama has not been able to formally close the whole institution. He's been trying to transfer out as many detainees and resettle them in third countries as he can.
You worked hard on behalf of these detainees on the basis of their rights, habeas corpus and religious. After all this, would you say that you're an advocate for human rights? Some would argue that they made plans to hurt this country. They should not be given these rights. Some weren't even citizens at all. And they would ask, why would you work on behalf of them? What would you have to say for something like this?
Well, I definitely do identify as a human rights advocate. And that's my portfolio at the School of Diplomacy. And I think that for many lawyers, some of whom were not even as sympathetic to human rights going into these cases, that there was really a conversion experience. And I think people realized how important it is to protect the rights that we do enjoy here. Human rights are not something that you can really force. So, they belong to you whether you're a wrongdoer, whether you are the best person on earth. One thing that became clear is that many of the people in Guantanamo were not necessarily wrongdoers. That there was an insufficient basis of evidence for concluding that these were terrorists or people who otherwise intended to harm the United States. Some people found when they met their clients that the military had already decided that they were not enemies of the United States, but they were being held anyway. So, I think that it's important to provide a vigorous sense of rights for all people, and that it makes us all freer.
Thank you for coming on the show, Dr. Wilson. It was great to have the insight of someone who was involved in the defense of Guantanamo detainees, and also for opening our eyes to the other side of this issue. Guantanamo is an issue that divides Americans deeply, whether we should have it or we should get rid of it, or whether that the detainees should have rights or shouldn't have any of these rights. Just having the other side of this being told is very informative, and I hope our listeners learn something from this. Again, thank you for coming on the show, Dr. Wilson.
You're very welcome, Daniel. Thank you.
This is Daniel Garay from the Global Current.
Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of The Global Current. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. I'm Alex Krause.
And I'm Dominique DiMarzio. We'll see you next week.
The Global Current is brought to you by the School of Diplomacy and International Relations at Seton Hall University. Our executive producer is Bill Golba. Our co-executive producers are Daniel Garay and Felicia Charbali. Our technical producer is Evan Doolittle. Our news and analysis editors are Gabriela Taveras and Catherine Beatty. The theme song is